Our next speaker is Dr. Harry O'Neill from the USC Rossier School of Education, and he is my motivation guru. I always go to him when I have any questions about that topic. So let me just launch your slides. Here we go. Okay.
Wonderful. She's my technology guru. A little role reversal here, but we won't get into that. I have a long talk in 15 minutes, so when I'm going through these slides rather quickly, the good news is they're going to be available to you after the conference. Okay, and my email will be here, and I'm around at the conference, so if an idea is either confusing or interesting, you can sort of see me in a break. I'm going to talk about career readiness, and other speakers with different terminology have alluded to it. Sarah DeWitt from PBS, she was talking about social emotional skills and gave an example of creativity and gave an example of collaboration. And Joan Herman, a prior speaker, talked about non-cognitive skills. And I think many of what Jan was talking about of attributes that you can adapt to, I would throw into the column of that. This is, of course, tied into the Common Core State Standards, but when you talk to people in the Common Core State Standards, they have, it's almost like one word. They say college and career readiness, real fast. And then they tell you about what content measures they have for college readiness. You know, standards in math and English and soon to be science. But if you talk to people who are hiring people, they're not interested in content. The number one variable that almost everybody says is, I want somebody in my shop that has good communication skills. The number two variable, sometimes number one, is says, I want the person to be drug-free. So most companies have screening programs now, particularly large ones. You don't get hired unless you pass a drug test. Fortunately, the university hasn't implemented that yet. But the point I wanted to make, which was, everything we've got done to date that is content related is going to be of less interest to people who are hiring people for entry-level jobs or jobs after community college. And the particular issue I'm going to talk about is domain-specific creativity, which I'll define in a minute. But almost all problem solving is you start executing the problem, and then you do some self-monitoring, and then you hit, things aren't going well, therefore I have to invent a solution. And that's the invention process is the creativity thing I want to talk about. And where the learning technologies come in is, that's how I'm assessing it. So I'm using games and simulations to assess these skills. I alluded to the fact that almost everybody will nod their head to the fact that we're not doing a very good job in high schools and community college of training kids for high demand, high skill, and high wage careers. And if we were doing that, then there'd be a curriculum someplace in assessment measures at the high school level and at the community college level. Why is this important? One of them is we're living longer, so we have more jobs. So you've got to prepare a set of generalized skills to some degree. And the last bullet, companies need to be agile, innovative, and creative nowadays, or they go out of business. So presumably you'd want to have creative people hired in order to help you stay in business. Technology turns out to be a blessing and a curse. The blessing is technology does all the easy stuff. All the stuff that's not cognitively complex, things that don't require judgment or decision making. The person's got to be doing all of that stuff. So if you look at those particular skills, inferences, diagnosis, judgment, and decision making, where in the curriculum are they? And what measures are we using to assess them? And how are we adapting on them? Where are the modules that teach this stuff? Everybody's got a different laundry list of what these skills are. And part of the problem is they come from people getting together and sharing ideas Sometimes they bring people from industry in, which is a plus. Sometimes they bring people in from small businesses, because that's where all the jobs are, right? That's a plus. But there's very little empirical work. Nobody knows what the real skills that are required to be successful at the job site in a lot of cases. A study that we haven't done, that I'm going to do one of these days, is because of these career systems where you can type in the keywords for the type of person you want to hire. You ought to be able to take all these taxonomies and type in those words and just figure out what percentage of the jobs that are out there have those words as keywords to describe the jobs they're trying to hire for. So if somebody's got some free time tonight, that would be a great study to do. PISA, as you may know, in 2016 is going to assess collaborative problem solving. And NAEP is also thinking of assessing collaborative problem solving. I was on one of their panels last fall, which was sort of the kickoff, the hard one, what is collaborative problem solving? And we have a list of 65 attributes or something or other. So if you look at knowledge is always domain specific. The skills we're talking about could either be domain specific or domain independent. And attributes are characteristic of the person. The attribute by treatment interaction or aptitude by treatment interaction. That's where this stuff is. And the term attribute, if you're reading the literature, is usually interchangeable with the term competency. So when you see the word competency in this particular context, they're talking about attributes or aptitudes. So the first thing I did is I figured, well, I'll collect all the taxonomies. And I'm in the state of California, so it seemed like useful to find out what they define career readiness as. And that's their laundry list. And the second one, CSSO did a really nice job in 2013, generating that list. ACT, the testing company, they have a test for this type of thing, and that's their list. And O'Neill 2014 is me. And of course, that's the correct list. But one of the things I tried to do was to line up these so I could show you what's the commonality between all these different frameworks. Okay. So you can see I did pretty well on the first one, critical thinking. And creativity was sort of okay. And then the whole thing falls apart. There's very little overlap. Problem solving appears most of the time. Creativity appears most of the time. Collaboration appears most of the time. But you can see that by these lists, they're more different than they are the same. And if you want to have standards and you want to have curriculum and you want to have assessments and all that kind of stuff, somehow we got to get a much smaller list because these are going to be outcomes of instruction, huh? We're going to teach people these skills and test for them. So we need a smaller list. And if you look at the attributes, only one line worked, huh? Self-efficacy. This is one's confidence and ability to accomplish a task. And everything else is different. I view creative thinking, metacognition, and teamwork as characteristics of people. So that's the reason I have it on the attribute list rather than on the skill list. Somehow you got to say how all these things fit together. So this is my knowledge, skills, and attributes. And if you look at the skill column, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 that I think are important, and there's some evidence in the literature that they are. And then you look at the attributes, I've got 4, and some evidence in the literature that's important also. And what I'm going to talk about today is the attribute of creative thinking. What's missing from all of this, of course, is some clarity of what the words mean. In a lot of cases, these laundry lists end up being laundry lists without a definition or a paragraph or an example of what the word means. It'd be useful. You need that for measurement, right? Yeah. I'm going to skip through this. These are all my definitions of my words. If you look at creative thinking, most people say it's got 4 attributes. There's a fluency attribute. This is the ability to generate lots of ideas. And that turns out to be the best single predictive of creative thinking. You know, you get a long list of ideas. It's apt to be some of them being original, flexibility and elaboration. How it's measured, usually, is with a domain general test, a trait test. How many uses of this class can you make? holds water, put paper clips into it, drink out of it, so forth and so on. So if I could generate 200 uses of that glass, it might be true that I might be a creative thinker. But it's about glass, huh? What you'd like to be able to have is, I think what you need is something that's domain-specific or task-specific. And the people that are doing that are, Milgram has done a lot of work in the creativity area, and also Hong, and myself to a minor degree. But what you do is you think of a real-life situation, like a kid on a playground, think bullying, and here's the prompt. So you got a scenario and then a prompt, right? And the prompt was, you see the kids are picking on somebody else. And then you asked, the test question, of course, is, if you were in that kid's situation, what would you do? You know, so some answers are, you say stop. Some answers are, you walk away and get the teacher. I guess crying would be another one. So at the end of the story, you've got a domain-specific creative thinking thing for interpersonal skills that deal with bullying. So the work that other people are talking about, particularly using simulation, you could give the same scenario, you give the text, and you say generate as many alternative solutions to the particular scenario you're dealing with. Say you're dealing with maintenance, something's broke, you gotta troubleshoot it. List all the troubleshooting solutions you can think of. How would you validate that? Well, what we're exploring is two different kind of scenarios. You get one at the basic level, which may not require the skill. Okay, so if it's, you know, tasks which have mainly procedural, there's the best solution, there's lots of good solutions, that probably isn't going to push somebody into the creative thinking business, huh? But you take a look at this type of task, it's very complex, unpredictable, and worst case is what you've been trained won't work, and it's disastrous. The world is worse off because you implemented something you were trained. So what you're doing, presumably, is you're trying to avoid that. And that presumably is what we kick the creative thinking in with. The talk that Alan didn't give, was going to give soon, his troops put together the stimulus control simulation. And what was interesting, the Navy has a very fixed procedure how to communicate. You know, you got a fire on board, or something's flooding. You just can't have people running around opening doors and fixing things. So they have a damage control center that all communication goes in and out, and it's proceduralized, steps. So the communication skill can be, you can generate a number by the number of correct procedural steps. So embedded in the simulation with no explicit measurement per se, because that's part of the way that particular job's done. It's sort of a best case, but it works. Some of the challenges in the creativity area, of course, is the creativity's got as many definitions as, think of a very large number. We really don't have any good selection measures for any of this stuff. And as Jan was saying, on the state side, we also don't have a lot of measures either. I think you got to address the trait-state distinction, which is traits are relatively enduring characteristics, relatively don't change over time, and states are things that are happening in a situation, and they fluctuate in intensity. So if you're in the business of training and you want assessment, you're usually playing the state game. If you're in the business of selection, think GRE, you're in the trait business. So for every one of these career readiness things, you need trait measures and state measures. Where we're going next, I think it'd be useful, looking at the second bullet, if you start with the idea, well, how are we going to assess these things? So you take out your laundry lists, and you go down the list and decide, how would I assess it? If you can't figure a way of doing it, you take it off the list. The other thing we need is a much shorter laundry list. So we need some way of getting all these different conceptual frameworks together and making them a list that you can get standards from and are tractable. And I think some of that could be get more experts in, but go to the job sites or the computer search business to see which ones in fact are being used at the job site. I would also focus on the entry-level positions, because I think that people come out of high school and out of community colleges or entry-level. And you could think about what are the knowledge, skills, and attributes that you would need for teams, groups of people working together. And I would put that in the too hard to do category until we get the rest of the stuff done. So some of this stuff is on our website. Think toothpaste with one extra S. And there's my email address, so if you have any comments or suggestions, always welcome. Thank you.